And then while the pandemic rages on for nearly 2 years and you're still in the thick of it, you encounter an unthinkable reality on December 6th of 2020. So just it was maybe like March when everything kind of broke out with COVID. And then in December, you remember when President FDR said that December 7th would be a day that lives in infamy. And for you, it was December 6th, right?
Yes. I'll never forget December 6th.
So take me back to that day, if you will. Like you said, it's a day you'll never forget. You shared some crazy things with me before, but I don't know if I've heard the whole story. I'd love for the listeners to hear the whole thing.
So December 6th, 2020 was a Sunday. So you're correct. COVID started March of 2020. December 6th on Sunday, I'm excited. I'm going to wake up. I'm going to go to church. It's going to be relaxing. Well, my phone goes off, starts blowing up at 6 a.m., and we're experiencing a malware attack. So I get up, get dressed, run over to the hospital, and the entire system was shut down in minutes. So this is where I say COVID is a good thing, because we already had the command center in place.
Oh, right.
So you get the necessary people involved. We start processing. How are we going to deliver care? And, when I talk about it now, because when you prepare in a hospital, you have to prepare for fire drills, for a whole bunch of things you do to ensure if a system were to go down, how are you going to function? Mm-hmm. And usually what hospitals do is that they get these big binders and they put everything in paper and in order and say, okay, if this happens, go to tab A and so forth. Yeah. Well, when you go through a malware attack and nothing is working, the binder is not helpful. It's helpful for certain things, but for example, how is now a patient going to order a meal and it's going to get to the kitchen and the kitchen's going to be able to fix it and it's going to be put in the special cart for transport to come and get it to the patient. So there's multiple processes that have to go in place. So that's what we did. And of course, what's number one is patient safety. So we developed a strategy very early on of nothing goes to pharmacy unless it's checked by safety officers, vice versa, to ensure that we're doing right med, right patient, as an example. And that worked beautifully. And as a clinician, when this occurred, what is wonderful to see is everybody steps up. People come out of the woodwork and they say, what do you need me to do? So thank God we had the command center in place. Mm-hmm. Thank God we put processes in place, because you need to understand. So when I started practicing in the 90s, where there wasn't an electronic medical record, everything was on paper. We had our blue charts. Everybody who's a clinician knows what the blue chart looks like on the nurses unit. But now you have a generation who's never grown up with paper,
right?
Or understand what a written order looks like, or how to sign off on things. So there was a team of clinicians who took time to educate, to build the forms, so that that was standardized. So everybody was knowing how to execute, how to write, how to execute, and how to deliver care that was built in an electronic system. Now it's all on paper. Mm-hmm. So you sit there and you say, wow, this isn't taught in medical school. This isn't taught in because we're so dependent on electronics now, which is not a bad thing. It's just a reality. So what I've learned from that experience is it's not about the binder. The binder is one aspect of it. Mm-hmm. The other huge component of it is once you're up and you survive something like that, what's the most important? Tabletop exercises, mock exercises to say, okay, we're shutting this down. Execute. How would you communicate with pharmacy? How would you communicate with the kitchen? How would you communicate with environmental care? How would you communicate with a physician? Right. So forth. So that day was a unique day. So that happened. I was there for many hours, which you were saying, because I know we talked about this early on when I told you what happened to me that day. Yeah. Then I'm driving home and somebody hits my car. It's a hit and run and takes off. So I had to deal with that. And then my husband, who was, just recovering from surgery, was having a medical situation. And as I'm trying to deal with a hit and run, says to me, can I ask you a question medically? And I turn around, I'm looking at him like, oh, this isn't good. So I had to take him back to the hospital. Thank God he was okay. But I thought, when they say things come in threes,
right,
that was a trifecta that day. But,
my goodness.
I'm going to say two things. One about COVID. The year 2020 was, by the World Health Organization, was deemed the year of the nurse. Okay. It was also Florence Nightingale's 200th birthday.
Oh, wow.
And let me tell you something. The year of the nurse, I do believe, and I mean this because I think you have to look at the positive that comes out of very challenging times. COVID really elevated the nursing profession, in my opinion, because people really understood what a nurse can do. Because a nurse, it does not come in one shape, size, and what they do in terms of delivering care. There's nurses who do informatics, education, care management, population health, a utilization review, you name it. Yeah. So I really do believe COVID did the nursing profession. It brought it to the forefront. I mean, we've always been the number one trusted profession, and still are, but it really elevated the practice. The second thing is when you go through a malware attack, it shows you who is resilient in terms of how disciplines have to come together to take care of the patients and the community. So as challenging as it was, we learned a tremendous amount, and you have to be able to be prepared, because what hospitals, it's so hard to invest into the software to protect organizations because it's not capital. You can't see it. Okay, so if I'm going to invest in building a new building for patient care, I know what it's going to look like. Right. But people or organizations, not even in healthcare, go, God, it's going to be really expensive maybe to invest in all of this software, because you don't just buy one software package and say, okay, I'm good for the next 20 years. It doesn't work that way. It changes constantly to keep up with the threats that come in. So not only do you have to have that component for safety, you also have to have the mocks and the tabletop exercises to be the most prepared, and to say, okay, if something were to happen tomorrow, we know we could address it. Like, is it going to be perfect? No, nothing's ever perfect. But at least you're prepared and people feel confident of how they're going to execute care. Right.
Yeah. There's so much to that. Something that struck me that you said a moment ago was kind of like the adversity brought out the best in people. You all of a sudden had a team around you who said, we're going to figure it out. Let's go. Almost like everybody knew their role, or they figured it out on the fly. Very, very important to have smart, dedicated, compassionate people who are in the mission, on task, ready to go. It's kind of like, it reminds me a little bit of like the terrorist attacks on September 11th. All of a sudden on September 12th, we all had kind of one shared goal. And whether you were on different political sides, or we weren't doing this cancel thing we're doing today, where everybody just said, the best in everybody came out. And I think maybe it's kind of the picture you're painting about what happened in the middle of the malware attack, where everybody said, okay, this is where we work and this is where we serve, and we're called to this mission. Let's jump in and figure it out. What do we need to do? Just became very clear to you.
Authentic leadership is a big part of that, because you have to remind people what is the mission. And you're right. And what happens is, because it's very stressful when these type of challenges happen to anyone, but it takes, people are, and not only did clinicians step up, non-clinical people stood up and said, these are our patients. This is our community. This is our hospital. We gotta do the right thing here. But it's exhausting. So as leaders, you got to figure out what is going to keep your staff going. And that's where, in my opinion, the servant leadership comes into play, because you have to be able to assess what people need, and you got to hear the voice of the workforce to understand how much they are suffering. So, it was a double whammy. You had COVID, because, as you remember that time, it was like this, the surge kept going up. How many ICU beds did everybody have? Are we going to have enough capacity? The nursing shortage. And then you're trying to rebuild your systems. So, you walk away some days and you're like, I really can't believe this is happening. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, it is what it is. And you have to find ways to stay healthy and keep going in every day and doing the right thing for people, because it was challenging for clinicians and non-clinicians. It was very challenging.